Russia, Jordan, and so on. Then 16.6 million are located in low middle income countries. Yeah, some of the African countries now also are included in the low middle income countries like Tanzania, Kenya, Angola, and so on. 5.6 million are located in low income countries like Uganda, Togo, Burkina Faso, Benin, and so on. So this is according to ILO, the International Labour Organization, but that is 2018. But this information keeps being updated, so you can look in the internet and see probably there could be countries that have jumped from where they were and now they are in different category. So I'm trying to explain where these migrant workers are located by the level of income according to the countries. So here this slide is about the data sources. There are 5 main data sources used to measure the flow and stocks of migrant workers according to the population census, household surveys, labor force surveys, administrative sources like the visa, residence, and so on and so forth. But of course, when you look at how data is collected, sometimes there can be a few errors here and there because of accuracy and maybe the way they collect the data. But this is roughly the picture that you should have. But data sources and measurements of migrant workers come from there. Okay. Yeah, this is also the continuation. Yeah, at the global level, we have the International Labour Organization. It has produced those global estimates on where people are and where they're working. Still, that is the continuation of the same. Now, data gaps and challenges on migrant workers. Data on migrant labor migration are scattered, mainly because it is difficult to collect reliable data on migrant workers. According to the Global Migration Handbook, Global Migration Group Handbook for improving the production and use of migrant data for development, data collection faces gaps and challenges. There is lack of data quality, including missing populations of interest, inconsistent period of data collection, or key characteristics of being collected. Then there is also limited data comparability due to different concepts. You know, recently I was thinking about the concept of human trafficking and the concept of migrant workers. Sometimes there's that blood division, the difference between the two, because someone can be going there as a migrant worker, but later on they start torturing them, they start holding their passports and documents. Then it turns out this person is like human trafficking. So you find that this is a migrant worker legally with a contract, but when they go there, things start changing. When they leave home, they are not told of what is likely to happen. I mean, like they get a very good picture that they are going to work in the supermarket in, for example, Saudi Arabia. But when they reach Saudi Arabia, this is a migrant worker. They are very sure of where they're going because there's a labor organization, that the recruitment agency, which is here in Uganda, and they go to the Saudi Arabia. But when they reach there, maybe they end up, instead of going to the supermarket, they are told they're going to be a household domestic servant, and their passport are held according to either their culture, that you have to hold the passport of the worker. But that is really subject of debate. We shall look at human trafficking and see what it is and what are the conditions for human trafficking. So there's limited data comparability due to different concepts or definitions and measurements and methods across the region. And also this categorization of migrants, whether they are really migrants or being trafficked. There's also lack of equipment to process data in national institutions or at border crossing points. You know, one time it was something very funny. It was an experience which was so funny. I was in Kenya where I had gone to process my visa form when I was going to Sweden. Because in Uganda, there is, yes, at the Norwegian embassy, you can process, but unfortunately I had stayed in Germany already for 90 days. So my time was up, so I had to stay for more time so that I can go to Sweden. But still, it was possible for me to get a visa for Sweden, but only for Sweden. So I had to go to the Swedish embassy in Nairobi because that is where it is located. But because I hold a Tanzanian passport and I was processing my visa, I had to leave with the passport there. So to leave Kenya, I had to go to my embassy of Tanzania, Tanzanian embassy in Nairobi. But when I went there, for them to give me the temporal travel document so that I can travel back here in Uganda, I was in shock. I was told that there are no papers. I was shocked because just to write for me is something to allow me to move out of of Kenya so that I can go back home in Uganda where I'm residing. I was surprised that they didn't have the material. It was like something funny. And I had to tell them, just give me any letter. Because they were lacking that particular paper, what we call the temporal travel document, where they could fill my information. I'm not surprised when we say that there is lack of equipment to process data in national institutions or at the border crossing points. Because the Kenyans were telling me, you have to go to Namanga. Can you imagine moving from Kampala? I go to Namanga to get the temporal travel document so that I can travel back and come to Kampala and Mbarara. It was shocking. Anyway, there is also insufficient expertise among the staff collecting and analyzing data, lack of infrastructure to publish key characteristics, population or place of interest, sufficient priority given to labor migration in national policy agenda and related budget allocation. Some of the things are not considered really a priority, but it's very important. Like, for example, in Uganda here, it is very important to know what is happening to the ladies who are working in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and so on, because recently we have had stories about torture of workers, domestic servants in some of those homes. But but we don't really get the details. Some of this information need to come up and the sensitization being put in place so that people can be aware of what is happening in those homes. So if there's insufficient priority given to labor migration, then that is really, in the policy agenda, one time I was so happy that the Ugandan parliament stood and tried to question some of these things about labor recruitment and so on because of the victims, because of the stories of the victims that they had from Saudi Arabia. So I think that was a very positive thing that the parliament did so that investigations could go on about these recruiting agencies who are taking the workers that side, but at the same time, those workers turn out to be as if they are trafficked. Okay, let us look at the challenges of migrant workers. So while the local population is able to voice their grievances or issues affecting them, most migrant workers do not have such privilege to express their concerns to address some of the challenges. Concerns about low wages. Dismal working conditions faced by migrants has also been raised by various NGOs, researchers, and journalists. This is what I was trying to say. So, however, social psychological challenges such as stigma associated with the labor which they have, social exclusion, and the xenophobia faced by migrant workers are also important areas that require attention. The issue of xenophobia we heard about Africans, meaning Ugandans and other Africans who are working in South Africa, how they face this xenophobia, discrimination, moreover from fellow Africans. That was really shame. You remember that Uganda, rather countries like Tanzania, had actually hosted some of these people during the time of their struggle when ANC was fighting for independence, for end of apartheid rule. And these countries hosted these South African people. And then later on, they started treating them in a manner which is not appropriate. So workers sometimes are challenged with the stigma and the associated social exclusion and so on. Yes, as gender, ethnicity, and the class intersect, male migrant workers from certain nations have been stereotyped as dangerous. So they face some sort of isolation of some sort. They are excluded. There are some testimonies that come from some of those countries in Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and so on. Being away from their families for a prolonged period of time is also an issue. You can see that some of those workers in some of these countries don't even have holiday, to maybe probably go and maybe see their family. So that is also leading to stress and depression. Yeah, more challenges. In an Amnesty International in 2013 report, it was highlighted that Indian workers in Qatar, they were facing challenges. They were not paid. So there were battles, you know. Some of the workers had planned even to commit suicide. So we are seeing that the following year, 800 South Asian migrant workers were reported to have died in Qatar since 2012. Some of these things are documented, only that I haven't put the source here, but information is there available on the internet. But again, in some countries like in Saudi Arabia, some areas like Saudi Arabia, we have this existence of kefala or sponsorship system. When you're working in someone's home, you cannot, if you have a conflict with that person, the host, you cannot change to another job until when he endorses it. So that is also something which has been criticized. Yeah? Workers are not able to change jobs without their employer permission. So that is also a very, very serious challenge. Yeah. Okay, so, you know, the issues that I have mentioned here, there are issues such as, like, for example, confinement. You know, like in Saudi Arabia, those families claim that to confine the worker in the home is kind of a culture. But to us, some of us may look at it as a human right issue, like they are restricting their freedom, because also the passports and the travel documents are held by the boss. So a domestic worker does not have the freedom. Now you imagine this domestic worker has to go outside and move in the street, but you have to move with their travel document. So if you don't have the travel document, it means what? You have to stay home. Yeah. Yeah, so also there are issues of cultural backgrounds. Having a different language, you have a different background with different language, then you go there, they have also different language. So that's also a challenge. Yes, and then also male migrants who are involved in labor-intensive work, such as construction and so on. There are those we refer to as occupational hazards, and some of them, I don't think that they are covered by insurance. The spread of HIV, which also has been, the issue of HIV can also be a challenge, because some of the migrant workers who turn to be like, what we call the kind of trafficked, I put it in quote, because it's not necessarily that, but people can be subject to sexual exploitation. There are a number of impacts. You will go in the notes in the LMS system of the university and read through some of these notes, negative impacts from the sending countries and also from the receiving countries. From the sending countries, of course, the countries of origin like Uganda, there's brain drain, disinvestment in human resources, unemployment, loss of cultural values and so on, because people take up different values when they go abroad there. So from the receiving countries, we also see pressure on the scarce resources. That's why probably South Africans were trying to fight their fellow brothers. Depression of wages, interference with the electoral process, because migrants also can also be cause of trouble in some places, land conflicts and so on. Unemployment, I've mentioned about xenophobic attacks in South Africa and so on. Yeah, you will continue reading some of those because time is up. The impact on migrants now, risk of health during traveling, harassment by law enforcement team in host countries, especially if they don't move with their documents, or if their term has expired and they are not able to renew. Economic hardships, accommodation, bad weather, people have to take time to adjust to new weather. There are also targets of criminal gangs like drug trafficking and so on. The issues of racism also, I don't need to explain it so much. So we shall look in the next lecture, we shall look at the human trafficking, yeah? And because it is also very connected to globalization as well. And then we shall see what comes next as you plan to prepare for your exams. Okay, so yeah, I think for now, we can actually end there.